Hi all, my name is Jordan Alum and I am a writer who was invited to the Get Lit Festival originally to be in conversation with the brilliant Kristen Millaris Young, who just released a book called Subduction. And I really encourage you all to read it. I am so sad that we couldn't get all together in person and talk about it and talk about her work and mine. But I hope that with this video I can give a little bit of a flavor of my performance style and also read a little bit of my work so that we get to have a little taste of what the festival would have been like. And something that I've been thinking a lot about in this stay at home order moment is how we keep the energy of performance when we're working with mediums that are, maybe unfamiliar, like video, or we don't have the benefit of audience engagement, which I really feed off of when I'm on stage. And so, one thing that I'm going to do today is just a challenge by choice to have our energy all get into our bodies before I go into my formal bio and read a little bit of my work. So, if you're willing to do this with me, you can do it seated or you can stand up and do it. But I just have everyone reach up to the ceiling on an inhalation. And on your exhalation, you make the sound of your day so far, which for me is yeah. So that's the sound of my day so far. And I hope that in that moment you got to feel what your day so far has been feeling like. All right. So you're going to see me on this video looking a little bit off screen so that I can read my work, but I hope that you enjoy it. First, I am a queer Bangladeshi American writer, performer, and social change educator based out of Seattle. My work engages with moments of rupture and transformation in the lives of people on the margins. And I performed on stage and facilitated workshops on embodied writing nationwide. I most recently have taught at Hugo House and performed at Town Hall Seattle locally. My short stories and articles have been published in a wide variety of places, including The Atlantic, Autostraddle, Culture Strike magazine, Seattle Met, and The Rumpus. And I am currently writing a debut novel which explores intergenerational trauma, Bengali folklore, and borders, both literal and metaphorical. So you can learn about my work at my website, jordanalum.com, if you're interested, and read on more. And so now you get to hear a little bit of an older piece from me, but one that's really near and dear to my heart, and I think captures a lot of those things that I like to say in my bio. Here we go. This is Sonali Exchange. Farhana sat on a giant leather couch in the parlor and filled out paperwork. Her heart was jumping in her chest. She'd never really wanted a nose piercing until this year, and even then it was just a passing thought. Now, at Amma's insistence, she was sitting in a swanky downtown tattoo parlor, racking her brain for the last couple digits of her social security number. Her mother, meanwhile, was genuinely enjoying herself. She made chit-chat with friendly patrons, commented on hair and accessories like they were all at a Bangladeshi wedding reception. Farhana handed her driver's license and the paperwork over to the tattooed man behind the counter, just as her mother got done petting a chubby Boston Terrier who had just entered the shop in the arms of its trendy owner, a woman with 4 earrings in each of her ears and a septum piercing. Amma, they're ready for me. Sure, let me just say goodbye to this little darling. Farhana held back an eye roll as her mother patted the dog one final time and it snuffled in response. So what made you want to get a nose piercing? The tattooed man asked, trying to make small talk as he swabbed her nose with disinfectant. It was mostly my mom's idea. She exaggerates, of course. She's told me she wanted to get one before, but then said no, it was too scary. I told her scary was not an excuse. Amma played with her own nose stud as she said this, grinning wickedly. The tattooed man laughed. We don't get a lot of parents that want their kids having nose rings in here. Please lie down and feel free to close your eyes. Mom, you can take her hand so she doesn't get too scared. Farhana felt her body seize up as the needle went through her nose. Her face got very hot, and she gripped Amma's hand tightly as the jewelry squeezed its way into her open puncture. She refused to open her eyes, even after the tattooed man said he was all done. See, X second, Dewey second, and it's finished. Not too bad looking at all, Amma said. her voice swelling with laughter and pride. She opened her eyes and was handed a mirror to see the piece, a rich gold nose hoop that wrapped its way around her left nostril like an equator line. Amma flashed a thumbs up in the mirror, and Farhana gave a lopsided smile in return. Her mother paid the man as he gave her cleaning information, and they stepped out into the brisk November air. Farhana brought her hand up to her face and instantly regretted it as she bumped against the new piece of jewelry. "It's going to be sore for a few days, Shitu." It took her a moment to realize that Amma was speaking to her. She hadn't heard her Daknam very often since she came to college 2 years ago. "I just don't want to get it infected. You worry too much about these things. When Chachi pierced my nose, they put shuta in there, and it was more gruesome than this beautiful thing. It won't get bothered as much either." Farhana shuddered at the thought of pulling a bloody cotton thread through the hole in her nose each night. She was grateful that Amma hadn't insisted on piercing it herself. Farhana rolled her eyes. "Let's get something to eat, and then we can go back to my dorm." They reached a cafe that promised gourmet New York cuisine and squeezed into a small corner table, soaking up the heat of the nearby kitchen as they waited. "Do you remember when you were in high school and Baba always said that you would run away to the big, big city? I never believed him, of course, but now look at it. I'm not that far from home." Amma clicked her tongue. "If we miss you this much when you're 3 hours away on the train, I don't know what will happen if you go farther. And you can come visit me more often if you really miss me that much." Amma clasped her hands on the table, and the waiter set down a basket of bread for their appetizer. She was simultaneously considerate and clueless. Farhana wished she could pull the words back into her mouth. It was yet another glaring example of how she could never be a full adult with either of her parents. They ate in silence for a few minutes until Amma's cell phone buzzed and she slipped out the front door to take the call. Farhana watched at her as she paced up and down the sidewalk, gesticulating wildly to an invisible audience. Amma had a booming voice that embarrassed her whenever they were in public. She had started insisting that Amma take her calls outside when she was in high school. Thankfully, with some gentle reminders, her mother had complied. "After we're done here, you'll have to go back to your room by yourself for a little while," Amma announced when she came back inside. "Baba wants me to check on some things that will be boring for you." Farhana put on an inquisitive look, but didn't ask any questions. She had been in the wrong enough times today. When their food came, they made small talk in between bites, and soon the moment was gone. Farhana dreamed in abstract colors and shapes. When she woke up, the room was cold and white. The window shade was pulled up to expose a thin layer of gray clouds blocking out the sun. Amma had left her some biryani in the refrigerator, and she heated it in the microwave before digging in with her hands. The meat was lukewarm, but the rice was soft and perfect, and she shoveled it into her mouth like a starved rat. She left the bowl on the counter and headed into the bathroom, washing her hands with a thin layer of soap. The nose ring was healing slowly. She prodded it with a Q-tip and came away with blood. Following her mother's advice, she applied some rubbing alcohol to it and squeezed her eyes shut as it burned her nostrils. Amma hadn't been telling her everything. Late last night, Farhana heard her angry voice speaking on the phone with Baba about his family back home. They wanted him to come visit and stay with them, or they needed more money, or they wanted him to send them American visas so they could visit. It was always something. Amma had said they were like Raj and Rani now. But the last straw was when Baba asked her to give up her jewelry for more funds. Amma was the eternal pragmatist, but those pieces carried too many memories to give up. She had spoken in rapid-fire Bangla, tearing Baba down with insults Farhana couldn't interpret. She could imagine her mother's fierce hand motions accompanying her jittery feet as they paced over the living room floor. After a few seconds, Farhana washed her piercing with water and returned to the kitchen. Her bowl was gone, already cleaned and on the drying rack. Amma was waiting in the living room, wearing a deep red orna wrapped around her chest like a small blanket. Her mouth was a thin, hard line. Your father gave me this when we got married," she said, pointing to the tiny gold ball jetting from her left nostril. "Is something wrong?" Farhana asked, sitting down beside her on the couch. "It's getting old." "What did Baba say to you?" Amma gave her a vacant stare. She and Farhana had had these conversations often when she was a child. They communicated on 2 different wavelengths, touching each other only for the briefest of moments. I have to take care of the house. Baba wants me to come home. Farhana's body stiffened. I can go with you. I'm leaving you some more food in the fridge, and we'll get some winter clothes before I go. And then there's the money that Baba wanted me to leave with you. I'll get that today, too. Amma stood and started pacing back and forth across the room, making a mental list of all the things they would have to complete in a day's time. She straightened out objects on the coffee table, picked up stray pieces of lint and hair, and readjusted her orna as she walked. Farhana kept her eyes trained on her mother's back, watching her bend and then snap back up each time the orna began to slip off her shoulders, placing it back perfectly square every time. Ma, I can come back home with you. I don't have much schoolwork. You're not doing that, Chitu. Amma gave her a look that bore straight through her. Farhana looked down. Let's get ready to go out, she said. I have my train at 6. When her mother's train retreated into the distance, Farhana remembered the first time that Baba had left for Dhaka when she was a little girl. At the time, she could barely understand him leaving for the supermarket, much less an around-the-globe trip. She had bawled for nights on end, and every one of the questions she asked her mother had ended in Baba. She walked back towards the dorm building with the memory imprinted on her mind like a scar. Amma would placate her by saying Baba's doing big business over there and making air quotes around the words big business, which never failed to make her burst into giggles. When she was older, she could finally understand that big business actually was the nature of Baba's visits. He would go to sort out the family finances and strike deals with dodgy landlords so that his sisters could keep their apartments in the big city. It was nothing like the occasional visit she herself had made there, when her family would throng around her and ask everything about American living, pop culture, and her Amma, who was always conspicuously absent. Farhana believed it was because she disliked the way Baba's sisters acted towards her, even after so many years of marriage. Amma was too occidental for them, loud where she should be soft, lax where she should rule with an iron fist. She had always been in between worlds, she would say. She had a story she would tell to prove this. When I first came to this country, she would start off, I didn't know how to dress for winter. Can you imagine bright green kameez and heeled sandals in January? Baba shook his head when he picked me up. He had to buy me a coat right there at the airport. And of course I was wearing all my best jewelry too. Well, I learned fast. Farhana dropped her bags on the floor and flopped straight into bed, fully clothed. The shopping bags she brought in toppled over from their own weight and spilled out everything from winter coats to gloves to grocery items for the rest of the week. The length of time before winter break never seemed so long as when she bought new items for winter. She thought of Amma crossing the border out of the city and into the suburbs, where time was not divided into semesters and breaks. She thought of Baba, leaving the country in as much time as it would take her to complete her final exams, and going to a place where time didn't seem to matter much at all. She curled up against a pillow, and in the next moment was asleep. Baba passed away in his sleep the night the world turned white. Snow blanketed the ground in drifts so high that the schools had shut their doors, and both students and professors alike hunkered down in their beds, resisting the idea of work with their entire bodies. Farhana had woken up with the thrill of missing class, but now felt restless in her empty dorm room. She could not fill the hole in her heart with free time. Baba had passed into the hands of Allah and left them all waiting. Farhana stirred sugar into a cup of tea and picked up her cell phone when it buzzed for a second time that morning. I'm flying Baba's body back home. Like a solid weight on her chest, her mother's voice came through the speaker and made it hard for Farhana to breathe. I don't think you should go by yourself, she said in a rush. I'll go with you. I'll take time off school. Even as she said it, she knew Amma would refuse. Farhana flipped through her mental catalog of family members, friends, anyone who could accompany her mother on a 14-hour plane journey to the other side of the world. She started to think about the work she would miss and felt guilty. No. You need someone to go with you. Baba wouldn't want you to go back on your own just for his sake. And you know... Shetu, Amma interrupted, her voice wavering. I've got all your papers in order here. Baba wanted that. You're not going to come with me, and that is what I want. I want you to be an amazing, brilliant girl here. You will visit me someday and tell me about it. Amma, what are you talking about? There was a pause. I won't be able to come back, Ammu. When I go, they won't let me come back. Farhana felt her body seize up for a brief, sharp moment and then go completely numb. She remembered the long phone conversations Baba had, the covert conversations in fast Bangla that she could never fully understand. All the times her mother pretended she had lost her ID and her father paid for their big purchases in cash. Amma was still talking when she came out of her reverie. Baba made sure to leave you everything that you need, Ammu. I just want you to remember to call me sometimes. Your aunties will give you the number. Farhana didn't ask who they were. She didn't ask when Amma would leave. She already knew. Baba's body would thaw and rot if she didn't go right away. She felt her heart beating its way out of her chest and willed it to stop. Amma's belongings came in several boxes on their doorstep. The delivery man hadn't even bothered to knock. She cut the tape and glanced at the items. There were pots and pans, some photo albums, a few discarded pieces of clothing that her mother would have no use for where she was going. Farhana dragged the boxes inside and left them near the entryway, open but untouched, for days. It was raining outside on a Sunday morning when she finally gave them another thought. She heaved one of the smaller boxes onto her bed and dug into it. Her fingers connected with a smooth wooden object, and she felt her arm vibrate when she touched it. She lifted out a dense wooden chest with a lock on it and a tiny key that still had its plastic covering. It looked new, like nothing she had ever seen Amma own, her Amma, the keeper of reusable items and cheap alternatives. Farhana took the key out and unlocked it. Piles of gold jewelry spilled out from the top and across her bedspread, rings and bangles in glittering green and fiery orange, dangling beaded earrings that flashed in the light, and delicate woven necklaces with tiny hook and eye clasps begging to be released from their wooden prison. The chest was endless. Farhana laid out each piece on the bedspread, smoothing them out with her fingers, and imagined her mother standing at the airport, waiting to board. Thank you for listening. Take care.